Buenos dias. Thank you for joining us for Bienvenidos, a CBA-DBA limited series podcast celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. A term that, as you will hear, can be both celebratory and controversial, as well as inclusive, yet isolating. Join Annie Martínez, the current second vice president of the Denver Bar Association and past president of the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association, as she explores the backgrounds and careers of some of Colorado's inspirational Hispanic and Latin lawyers.
Hola, mi gente. It's Ana Mari Martínez, or as you may know me, Annie Martínez. I have the honor of serving as your current DBA second vice president, as well as the distinct pleasure of coordinating our Hispanic Heritage Month programming for the CBA and DBA. To give you a little bit of background on myself before we move forward, I've been living in Colorado since 2014. I grew up in a town called Hialeah, Florida, which is a Cuban enclave in Miami. My parents are Cuban. My mom came in the early 70s, and my dad is what we affectionately call a Marielito. He was ordered out of the island in 1980 on the Mariel boat lift. I currently work in child welfare and domestic relations in the metro area and have been in solo practice since 2018. Now that that's out of the way, let's cover our plans for the month. We've really got a fun mix of programming highlighting Hispanics across the state in our weekly newsletter, The Loop, some fun mixtapes coordinated between myself and Ty Glover highlighting music from the Caribbean to South America, and a fun end-of-the-month celebration. But perhaps my most favorite part of our programming are these podcasts that will be airing weekly, speaking with different members of the Hispanic community on a variety of topics. And today's session is our very first. And so we'll be discussing Hispanic Heritage Month in terms of what it is, who is a Hispanic, as well as having a conversation with Carlos Romo. Carlos is the president-elect of the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association and will be serving as president in 2022. And so welcome to the studio, Carlos. Hi, Carlos. How are you?
Hi, Annie. Thanks for having me.
Hey. So I'm not sure a lot of people know you, actually. I know you, right? I know that we're friends and we've served on the board together for a while. And I even remember pushing you to run for president. And but I know that you've been in Colorado, for a few years now. Why don't you give us a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What's your upbringing like? And what brought you to Colorado?
Sure. No, I appreciate it. Realistically, I have only been here about 4 years, so it's true that a lot of native Colorado CHBA folks don't know me that well. I came from Texas. My family is from Texas. Both my parents were born in Texas, and so I'm Tejano. And but my dad's family is originally from Mexico, northern Mexico, a little town called Musquis near Del Rio. And so I've got the Hispanic heritage from my dad's side and the Cajun heritage from my mom's side. My mom grew up in Louisiana, and so I have a little bit of that Cajun Mexican thing going on, and definitely influences my cooking as much as anything. But I started, went off to California for undergrad and went to Stanford undergrad, and then went to UT Law in Austin, and spent the first 10 years of my legal career practicing in Texas. And then decided to reconnect with my high school sweetheart, who was also from Austin, Texas. And she and I, Jessica, some folks have met at DBA and CBA, CHBA events. So she's always willing to come to CHBA events.
Awesome.
Much fun. She loves the Latino culture as much as I do. So that's one of the reasons we got married and reconnected. But we reconnected in 2015, and she was actually living here in Boulder, Colorado, after doing her residency in Colorado. So after reconnecting, I knew that when we got engaged in 2016, I wanted to move out to Colorado. And so I looked up some of the folks that I had practiced with. Actually, as a 1L in law school, I clerked for Faegre and Benson at the time.
Oh, wow.
And so I knew a couple of people. Mm-hmm. And reached out to them, and Zeke Williams in particular was one of the few folks I knew in Colorado, and was interested in coming out to Colorado and starting work here. And sure enough, a couple of months later, I got a job and started in February 2017. I like to tell folks sometimes that I attended the CHBA banquet in Colorado before I was even located in Colorado. It was like one of my first, communities, if you will. And there was always a very welcoming community. Winter Torres actually was at my current law firm, Williams, Weiss, Pepple, and Ferguson. when I started, and she was on the board at CHBA. And so she invited me to attend the CHBA banquet in January of 2017. And so I was able to come to the CHBA banquet, the annual banquet, which was a lot of fun, and do the after party and the dancing and everything and hang out with everyone before I even was actually located in Colorado. So,
that's so cool.
That was a really neat experience. And then all along, CHBA has just been a great community, really welcoming. I think a lot of legal attorneys know some communities can feel kind of insular or, hard to break into. And Colorado's just been really welcoming to me in general in terms of coming from Texas and CHBA in particular, invited me onto the board. First, I think Catherine Starnella was the president who invited me on as the chair of public policy and was doing a lot of work on census redistricting issues. And I think you and John and others were really pushing for me to keep up with the organization. And I really enjoyed the organization. So I said, of course, signed on to be the president for next year.
Well, we weren't going to let you run away. Once we find talent, we try to keep moving you up the ranks as much as possible. That's for sure.
Well, it's true. I've heard some people, I think Judge Espinosa has referred to it as a leadership machine. And, it's just CHBA is a great grooming opportunity for a lot of young Hispanic lawyers in the state. And so I'm hopeful that, my presidency will just continue to increase that pipeline of great Hispanic young leaders and try to get them into the next level of leadership.
That's awesome. So that's actually a really great segue into, so you're serving as president-elect now, but you'll be president next year. Like, what are kind of some of the big picture items that you're really looking at for your presidency next year?
Yeah, I mean, the past few presidents, including you, have done such a great job of kind of creating these kind of legacy items that I think everyone needs to continue with. Things like increasing the diversity in Latinos on the judicial, openings and candidates for judicial officers. I think that's a huge priority that every president should continue to push, until we have, equality within the ranks of judicial officers in Colorado. One of my priorities, I think, is going to be education. We were talking before we got online about, the pipeline and Law School Yes We Can and other programs that are trying to get increased diversity within the law schools. So I think that's really important to get, the message out to younger folks in not just college, but also high school. Yeah. And just, I think Judge Espinosa, again, has his dream team and other folks that are out there in the community and just doing what we can to promote those kind of opportunities and, have younger Latinos see mentors that are doing what they're doing and try to follow in those footsteps. But, that was always something that kind of inspired me a little bit, is being able to see, Hispanics doing great things in Texas, and some of my parents' friends were lawyers, and seeing that kind of opportunity and, doing what they do and having mentors like that really inspired me to go to law school. So I think it's the same way that, if we can get some of those talented folks that maybe are on the fence or maybe not sure what a legal career could look like, trying to motivate them to think about it in terms of the tool that it could offer, in terms of the power and the ability to do a lot of different things with a JD degree. So
I agree. I definitely see having this degree as like an honor and like an obligation to use it for betterment for our community in whatever way it can be, whether it be directly in your practice or whether it be stuff like this through the bar, working and giving back to the community. And I think that's a unifying thing amongst Hispanics, is always giving back and, caring about family and having a very broad definition of family, right? We have our Chaba family, that's what we call it. And so I think that really ties into part of one of the unique identifiers that is common amongst being, Hispanic or Latino. Is having family and giving back and having that as like a priority. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing is just, I think a lot of people just don't know what you can do with a law degree and how you can give back. And, whether it's pro bono, whether it's working in, noble private family services like child welfare services like you do, there's just so many different ways that you can give back via the law. And so I think inspiring others and motivating others to do that is key. Like even me, when I look back at it, like I remember some conversations right after graduating in undergrad with my dad, and my dad was encouraging me to go to law school. And I was like, I don't want to shuffle paper all day. I don't want to just like be sit at the desk kind of. And I was very interested in policy and, politics, less in the kind of running for office kind of way, but more in the kind of, helping and shaping others and via policy and law and kind of, those kinds of things. And so like I kind of did a career early on in public policy and worked for kind of a research and advocacy center. And it was only until a judge, Scott McCown, became an executive director of that policy center, and he was the one that really encouraged me to go to law school and kind of encouraged me, what all the different things you can do with the law. You can do policy, you can do pro bono, you can do services for challenging laws that are inequitable or justice, social justice issues and those kinds of things. And so that's really what motivated me, is having a mentor like that, kind of nudging me and pushing me. So hopefully we can kind of populate the world in Colorado with a few more Chaba mentors and family members that are out there, increasing the Chaba family.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. That's so cool. That's a really cool background. I didn't realize you had worked in policy before. I knew you had that background because that's one of the reasons why you served as public policy chair first on the board. Yep. I didn't know that that's part of where it came from. That's really cool. Yeah, and it's still kind of a big part of my practice. I'm a natural resources lawyer, and a lot of what I do is kind of environmental energy policy. It's broader than just, a contract, between entities or litigation between entities. Oh, wow. So we work on a lot of rulemakings, a lot of administrative law, a lot of, federal lands law. I had the opportunity this last semester to teach at CU and taught federal lands and policy and resources law. And that's awesome. Just the kind of stuff that, the broader policy objectives of what we're trying to accomplish has always been something that has interested me, as opposed to just the kind of, one-off clients or cases or whatnot. That's so cool. That's really awesome. That's a really great opportunity I've had to be able to teach. I'm a little jealous. I hope to teach one day. Yeah, we're always looking for, I'm sure schools are always looking for folks that are practitioners, the adjunct faculty world, which I felt like I had enough years under my belt where I actually could speak with some authority in terms of how things are done. Yeah. And it was fun. It was, I had guest lectured a few times at DU and CU in various classes, administrative law as being one, but having the control over your class and being able to bring in, case studies and different things that kind of are, fresh out of the news, those kinds of things, like getting the class talking about like what they're passionate about, and having good conversations about that kind of stuff. I thought it was really fun. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot. It was a lot of fun too. I bet it's a lot of work. So in terms of what we're doing for Hispanic Heritage Month this year, what are the kind of things that CHBA has planned? Yeah, we're trying to get together various times over the next month. Hispanic Heritage Month oddly starts in the middle of the month, September 15th to October 15th. So we've got, kick things off on Wednesday, September 15th. We're going to do an event at Raíces, which is a brewery down by Mile High Station, which is just a great community center. They've been really a great community partner with CHBA. They're started by some Latinos, and they want it to be a place where not just CHBA members, but the whole Latino community can get together, and it's a great spot. It's a really nice brewery. Yeah. So we're going to do an event there. We've had a mixer a few months ago that was great, well attended by a variety of the diversity orgs, and co-sponsored by pretty much all the diversity orgs. And I thought that was a great event. Just felt you could feel the energy and kind of the pent up demand for like in-person gatherings. Everybody, for fostering community. Yeah, just like a lot of people were there, and just anxious, I think, to see one another again face to face. And sometimes you see people on Zoom, and you don't make the connection when you see them in person for the first time in a while. Wow. That happened to me with one judge that she'll remember, but. I had that happen to me at the an El Jardín event that we had. What was it, last month? I totally walked past someone, and then they were like, "Annie!" I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." I was like, "I didn't see you with a square around your head and only up to the shoulders. I did not recognize you. Sorry." Had it happen, and I was like, "That's embarrassing. I don't know how to socialize anymore." It's like I became feral. We need to go out and mingle a little more again. So the 15th will definitely be a ton of fun. Raíces is a great venue, and like you said, they really do. It's a great organization, a great business, and they really do prioritize being like a hub for the Hispanic community in the metro area, and I guess the greater area, but primarily metro. And they do a great job of working with a bunch of organizations, having fundraisers for all different kinds of groups, and really just being a physical place that we can go and congregate at and as a community. And the beer's great. So, there's you really can't complain. They always have some good food trucks too. Some of my favorite food trucks, like the Puerto Rican food truck, goes there, I think, like once a week. And I'm always so happy about it because even though I'm Cuban, I can cook Cuban food, but I can't cook Puerto Rican food. And access to Puerto Rican food in Colorado is just about as dire as access to Cuban food is in Colorado. So when I can find that food truck, I'm there. So.
I hear you. A lot of Texas food items that I miss in Colorado. As much as there are Latino influences, including a lot of Mexicans here, it just feels a little bit different from Texas and the food I grew up with. My grandparents were actually owners of a Mexican restaurant south of San Antonio for about 25 years.
Oh, wow.
So those are some of the moments that I cherish a lot with my grandmother, just kind of learning to cook from her. And, just even in the last 5 or 10 years of her life, she lived until she was about 85. I still remember making arroz con her, with her, and just like she'd do a big tamalada every year. Yeah. And so now, like in here, even though there are tamales in Colorado, I feel like I kind of have to make them myself because if I want them done the way that like my family did them.
Yeah, if you want your version. Yeah, and that's so funny. Tamales are actually a really great example because I feel like it is something that most Latin American countries do, and they all do it so differently. Yeah, like it's one of those. It kind of goes even to dovetail into our conversation about the word Hispanic versus Latino and Hispanic Heritage Month. It's funny how we try to put us in a box because it's easier that way, right? And we use the word Hispanic because that's the easiest way to do it, and kind of that's what the government gave us to work with, and we don't really have a choice there. But we're not a monolith in that sense. And there's so many differences. And even to your point, where you have a rich cultural heritage of, Latino and maybe even specifically Mexican in both Texas and Colorado, how differently it plays out. Just in I think people fight about chili. I don't eat chili, so I don't know nothing about no green chili, red chili. I don't know none. It's all too hot for me. Again, this is another shocker. Whenever I tell people Cuban food isn't spicy and their head explodes, and I'm like, yeah, the Caribbean's different.
That's true. Different Caribbean, different spices. No, I totally feel you there. It's even going off to undergrad in California, there was a much bigger kind of La Raza Chicano movement than what I was used to in Texas. And getting accustomed to that was kind of new. And so, different communities in different places, I think, is it's a cool part of being Hispanic, because it's just there's a variety there.
And it's always nice to kind of get in the different milieus, right? Like growing up in Texas and being surrounded in it that way, I'm sure is different than, like you just said, in California. But you can be fluid with it. I guess that's, the fun part, like you're saying. There's a lot of fluidity there because there's enough to anchor. Yeah. There's enough connection to keep an anchor where, you can be fluid with it. I may not eat chili, but I eat other things that I've learned to eat out here in Colorado that I never would have had back home in Hialeah. And I have also introduced friends out here to Cuban food and do stuff like that. And it's always fun to highlight those differences, but with that common anchor, that common root that still kind of connects all of us. It's really fun. And food is one of the best ways to do it, right?
For sure. That's definitely my favorite of food and music, I think, are one of my two things with the Hispanic culture and being Mexican in particular, mariachis and trios and, having good Mexican food and trying to cook Mexican food for my family and pass on some of the recipes from my family down onto my younger kids. And my daughter right now, Chloe, is really into buñuelos.
Oh, that's so
So she's making buñuelos at night at 2 a.m. on her own. We'll smell something upstairs at 2 a.m, and then it's sure enough, she's making fresh hot buñuelos. So.
Ay, qué rico. That sounds good. Actually, I'm jealous. I don't know how to do that kind of stuff. I'm very much a meat person. Almost everything I cook is some type of meat.
But music too is, It's funny because growing up, my dad always sang a lot of mariachi in the living room, always had it playing at least. And so, we would, I remember at my wedding and stuff, we would sing mariachi songs together. And when I went off to learn Spanish, because I didn't really learn it in casa, I went and learned it in Mexico and then spent a year in Uruguay. So really that's where I learned Spanish as a Fulbright scholar in Uruguay after college. Cool. But going and being able to sing the lyrics and understand, and so now we'll go down and we'll find the mariachi band at the local restaurant in Mexico when we go, and we'll sing we'll sing songs together and stuff. So
mariachi is a little newer to me. I definitely grew up with salsa in our household. That was a big, and salsa and merengue, Celia Cruz all the time. Hector Lavoe is a big one. That was what we grew up with. But my family also, they had this weird, and maybe it wasn't like this for you. Everybody's a little different, but until we moved to Hialeah from Chicago, there was like a little bit of that chip on their shoulder of wanting to be a little more Americanized. And so we also listened to like Queen and stuff like that. My dad loves Queen. Yeah. But when we got to Hialeah, which was so predominantly Cuban, I mean, this is a spot where billboards are in Spanish. You go to the government office, the default is Spanish before they speak to you in English. So it felt like we were able to embrace our culture a little bit more. And I grew up kind of really lucky, I think. I didn't have some of that exposure that some of our community members may have had of feeling othered by being Hispanic. I didn't really have that till college because I lived, that's what we were. We were the predominant group. We were the majority. So that was, I feel like, kind of a cool experience that I wouldn't have had my family not made that sacrifice to leave Chicago and go to Miami, where we were the majority. But then coming out here was a big culture shock because I would meet someone and I would start speaking in Spanish and they're like, "Oh, I don't speak Spanish. I apologize." And I'm like, "I am so sorry for assuming, that's so rude." But that is the default. Someone with a Hispanic last name, I'm assuming they're speaking Spanish, and it's not a safe assumption to make. Probably outside of Miami, honestly.
Well, in Texas, most people do speak Spanish in a lot of spots, but there's a huge community of Tejanos. They're kind of the blends of the Texas Mexicans, which has been going on for a couple hundred years. And there's definitely a fair amount of us, I think, that don't grow up speaking Spanish. But you hear some words, chanclas here or there, some random thing that you remember growing up with. But yeah, it was a big thing for me to want to learn Spanish and to make the commitment, and so spend a lot of time. It was my lowest grade in college. Like me and my wife had the lowest grade in Spanish together, and it's just one of those things that the accent marks always got me. Like writing and reading, but enough time, I really wanted to do it and learn it, and so I spent a few extra years to try to learn it, but it was worth it in the end just to finally get it. Now, I don't practice enough to really keep up with it, but whenever I travel, we go to a lot of Spanish-speaking countries now just to kind of keep up with it. And
that's awesome.
It's always fun to be able to speak, when you're down there with the natives, and
it's always nice to be able to communicate directly is always an advantage and a nice feeling for sure. Yeah, I take that for granted sometimes, but yeah, I enjoy speaking it as much as possible. We grew up speaking both at home, and then I feel like I went to boot camp working at Macy's in South Florida, where everyone spoke Spanish. So all my clients, everyone who came in to shop to buy makeup, I worked the Clinique counter, and it was, "Oye, mija, vente pa acá, ta, ta." And I was like, well, my Spanish is going to get good today. The time that I worked there before law school started was like my boot camp in Spanish for sure. It became like I started thinking and dreaming in Spanish that whole period of time because it was just such the default. But then, coming out here, I use it more sometimes with my clients even than with like other individuals like friends or colleagues. But then with my mom and my grandma, I speak in Spanish with them a lot, and my dad too. My dad's got that typical like Tony Montana Scarface accent so his English is always kind of a fun experience to listen to, even though he's been here since he was 18. It's still really rough.
Well, I mean, my mom grew up in Louisiana, like I said, then in Houston. and she's, you know, Anglo and has some Irish influences, but redhead, you know, and but she was very interested in Latino culture and spent a year after graduation from Texas in Nicaragua in like the 60s, like, you know.
Oh, wow. That was a time. Yeah.
Pretty heavy time. And so she has always worked with immigrant families and has written some books on education and immigrants, and is kind of been committed to the Latino culture, you know, her entire career in life. And so growing up as well with, you know, both of those influences, even though I'm a half-breed, so to speak, you know, it's like I've had the cultural influences from both sides.
That's awesome. That's really cool that your mom really found like a, you know, like a love for that and affinity for the culture, and then it helps strengthen it for you. It's not just from your dad's side, right? Like she's constantly reinforcing it in her own ways, which is really nice, it sounds like.
Well, and some of my earliest memories are traveling with them in Mexico for my mom's work, like for doing, I think her dissertation was on immigrant families from like Bejucos, you know, weird places in Mexico that were like real rural. And I just remember traveling in some of those places and just, you know, floods in Mexico, or, you know, mountain sides, and getting, you know, Mexican hot chocolate in the mountains, and, you know, just random little memories
that's really cool.
that are filled mostly from her work and doing, you know, and then even in Texas, a lot of her work involved very low income immigrant families, like, you know, families that were 15 to a room, you know, one house, and like the smells that you would go into those families, and it's just, they're cooking rice and beans or, you know, whatever. Those smells just stick with me. So it's like I'll walk into like the back of a Mexican restaurant, and it'll just like take me back to like, you know, some of those houses that I visited with my mom back in the day. So.
Oh, wow. That's such an interesting, like, that's cool. I haven't had the opportunity to really travel like that. So, and I've never been to Cuba. So it's definitely something I would love to be able to visit more countries and have those experiences, and also just go to Cuba one day.
Are you barred from going, or is it?
So yeah, there's allegedly there's like concern that if you go and they know that your parents were Cuban and left, you could have issues either getting in or getting out. Yeah. So we have that kind of shared concern about, well, will we be able to leave? Will we even be let in? I know, like, it's an interesting dynamic. Like for my dad, he has no desire to go back. He's like, they sent me, you know, they told me to kick rocks, sent me packing with the shirt on my back. I don't have any reason to go back there. And, you know, my mom and my grandmother, they fled domestic violence from my grandfather. So they come with like a different perspective. And so for them, they do want to go back and see it and kind of visit where they were. My grandma would love to see. Our family was really rural and really poor. Like we were like she always says, we were the country bumpkins of Cuba. So she's like, I want to see the farm that Papa, you know, worked on. And I'm like, oh, like that would be nice for my grandma to see. But I don't know if that'll be a thing, honestly. And it's unfortunate. It's a really interesting dynamic, the Cuban experience, I would say. And it's just another thing that kind of shows like how we're not a monolith as a community, and it's really hard to kind of categorize Hispanics as like this all-encompassing thing when we're all really so different. I'll do a little background just so we can hit some of our history, just since I promised, you know, our loyal listeners that we were going to do that. So like you had mentioned at the beginning, it is funny. It's like a September 15th to October 15th. There's kind of a little stereotypical joke that like most Hispanics, it gets in late and it leaves late. And that's why it goes 15 to 15. And, you know, the whole goal is to really celebrate the histories, cultures, and contributions of American citizens whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America. And that was kind of like the historical basis for it. And it started in 1968 as a week under Lyndon Johnson. And then Reagan in 1988 expanded it to that 30-day period. And it was actually enacted into law August 17th, 1988. Apparently, the reason why September 15th is the significant day and why it starts then is not because they're calling us running late, but it's because it is the anniversary of independence for certain Latin American countries like Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And then Mexico and Chile celebrate their Independence Day September 16th and 18th. And then you also have Dia de la Raza on October 12th. which kind of still falls in that 30-day period. So that was really kind of, I guess, some of that historical background on Hispanic Heritage Month there. I've noticed that we've both used Hispanic and Latino kind of interchangeably. And I want to talk about that a little bit too with you. So from your perspective, like, what is your understanding, or which do you use? What do you prefer?
I use Latino more. I think Hispanic is more of a kind of a government created, census type data question. And, maybe my mom would probably get mad at me. She's a sociologist and does a lot on race and ethnicity. So I don't know exactly if Hispanic is, more on the race side or ethnicity side. But for me, Latinos just kind of feels more like my word, a community word, as opposed to Hispanic just seems kind of official, in some way. Definitely. But I can understand why, people would call themselves either one. I don't get offended by someone calling me Hispanic or Latino, whatever you want to say. But then obviously the latinx is the next level of, because I can appreciate the masculine feminine distinction there and wanting to be more inclusive. And so that's, sometimes I forget to use that in a lot of conversations, but it's important to keep in mind and to think about that as well.
Definitely. I always find that to be interesting because you've got some academic, I feel like, linguist kind of diehards who argue that in the Spanish language, it's already gender neutral when you use the masculine, which is kind of like, well, do you hear what you're saying, though, that the masculine is the neutral? Exactly. So you're saying the masculine is the default.
Yep.
You kind of proved my point. So even that argument for me kind of fails. I get where they're coming from in terms of like, oh, well, formally, according to linguistics. But I don't necessarily agree in that sense. I don't take qualms with being called either Hispanic or Latino or Latinx, or I think even some people are using Latine, like just with the E at the end with the little acento. So I think it's constantly evolving. And I think my perspective is just be aware and be considerate of the people you're with. And if they tell you, try to remember, right? Like kind of like with pronouns. If you don't know, don't assume. But once they tell you, please remember. Right. Like, stuff like that, where just not assuming and taking that one step, that 1 second to be a little more thoughtful and considerate can make a huge difference in one's interaction with somebody. That it's not always easy to remember to do, but hopefully we all continue to try to do that as people, right?
That's right. But yeah, even throughout, my life, there's been always so many different names: Tejano, Chicano, Hispanic, Latino, Mexican, Mexicano.
Well, and a lot of people don't even like to be Hispanic or Latino. They'll tell you, I'm Chicano. Exactly. They'll tell you, I'm Cuban. Yep. And they're like, were you born there? No, but I'm Cuban, So like, that's pretty common. Like growing up in Miami, we're, a lot of us are first generation, but what's that thing? Ni de aquí, ni de allá. You don't feel like you're from here, and you don't feel like you're from there. And that's kind of something that I feel like is a common experience for a lot of first generation Hispanic or Latinos. And they tend to kind of say, I'm this, even though this doesn't include the American part, which is technically where we were born for a lot of us. We just kind of like, forget, I'm Cuban, or I'm Chilean, or my friends that are Colombian that are like, no, I'm Colombian. I'm like, you were born in Hialeah Hospital, dude. So we're the same, right? In that sense of not even always identifying with that umbrella term. Yep. That is kind of sometimes doesn't always feel right. It doesn't always sit right. And I think it goes back to kind of what we were both saying. The government gave us that term. Yep. We didn't give ourselves that term. I think one of the key distinctions, and I think why sometimes Latino or Latinx is favored more, is because it focuses on the fact that you're from Latin America. So like Hispanic does not include non-Spanish speaking countries in Latin America, like Brazil, let's say. But then Hispanic includes Spain. And there's a significant difference in being like a Spaniard and being Mexican or Colombian or so, that's a really different experience and probably a very different treatment in culture, right? I mean, if you're Spaniard, you're probably white, right? And a white Hispanic doesn't have the same experience as like maybe a mixed Hispanic who either shows more prominently as either Afro-Latino or indigenous, and they present quite differently and have really different life experiences. And so it just feels really different to use Hispanic versus Latino sometimes, because, Latino will include, it focuses on Latin America, which is usually who we're talking about when we have these conversations. When we're talking about disparate impacts on the Hispanic community, we're not including Spaniards in that conversation, right? So I think it's one of those kind of funny things that maybe will continue to evolve, right, in terms of like which words get used. So Carlos, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I know we briefly mentioned the En El Jardín event that took place this year, and we didn't have our normal formal banquet in January for the Hispanic Bar Association. So give us a little kind of like insight as to what led to the Jardín, and are we going to be seeing it again, or is it coming back? Or
I thought El Jardín was really successful. I mean, it was really nice. It just felt kind of Latino, being outside and, networking and, having everyone together again. And just in that beautiful space, Botanic Gardens just felt really kind of part of us in some respects. But so I do think we are going to do something very similar, maybe in a, new format, but at the Botanical Gardens next year, probably around the same time in terms of late August, September, maybe kind of Hispanic heritage style. So yeah, keep an eye out. Hopefully more people can be involved. We sold out El Jardín. It was a high demand event, and we unfortunately had to turn people away. So next year, hopefully we can do almost like a blend of the El Jardín and banquet maybe together into one event. And I think that's kind of the direction we're headed right now, and maybe kind of bigger, badder, better.
That's so exciting.
But still keep the kind of same feel of being at the gardens and having networking and a lot of time to see each other, as opposed to just sitting down listening to people talk. So.
Definitely, I think I'm a huge fan of how the EC did the En El Jardín event. It was beautiful. It was really intimate, and I think scaling it up, but keeping that kind of intimacy in terms of being able to mingle and communicate is going to just be great. And I think it was a huge success. You're right. It sold out mad quick. And it was, people didn't want to leave. I could tell that they were starting to like clean up.
Yeah, that's right.
People are cleaning up. The staff is looking at us, and we're just all still hanging out. Like the bar had already closed like half an hour before.
Well, and Jess and I went back like 2 days later to the Botanic Gardens because it's so beautiful that time of year.
It really is. The gardens at that time of year is like peak gorgeous for sure. So that was a great event. I look forward to seeing it, like you said, bigger and badder next year. But I think that's going to be a really nice tradition that hopefully all of our sister organizations can continue to support. And then in terms of Chaba and Hispanic Heritage Month, I know we talked a little bit about Raíces at the beginning of the month, but what do we got? What are we looking at for the second half?
Yeah, we're looking at a couple more events in late September, October. I know you're thinking about doing something at La Rumba, and hopefully that will pan out, and we'll get everybody notice out to everybody to get their dancing shoes on. And then AJ Martínez and the Young Lawyers Division are planning another event at some point, and hopefully we'll get together and have a similar feel. So
that'll be awesome. That'll be a lot of fun. And usually those kind of things go out in the loop, those announcements, but they can also check, what's the website again? chba.net?
That's right.
Awesome. Yep. So yeah, check it out, be in the loop, ping it on your radar, however you want to call it, to not forget that there'll be more events towards the end of Hispanic Heritage Month. And this is going to be kind of our weekly question here that I'm going to do to our guests. And so, Carlos, you'll be the first one to get to answer it. So I'll be, hopefully listeners be gentle. So Carlos, I know this is a loaded question, but what does being Hispanic mean to you?
It's a good question. It's a tough question. I mean, growing up Hispanic, I think it was definitely community and culture. Those are the things that come to mind right away, is just family, community, culture. When I think about being Hispanic, I think about my grandparents and family traditions and getting together for asados and family gatherings at the restaurant that my grandparents owned. We were always there at ordering off the menu that my grandparents put together. It was like great moles and all kinds of tapaqueñas, steaks, and all kinds of enchiladas and stuff like that. So food, culture, community, family. It is an identity, right? It's like definitely influences who you are as a person in terms of growing up in that kind of cultural spirit, if you will. So I think being Hispanic to me is just all of those things that kind of come out in various ways, whether or not it's, a love for travel in the Americas, or a love for the music of the Americas, or a love for the food of the Americas. It just all comes out in that kind of unique way. And then I do think family is very important. Family gatherings, community, having people like I think my household growing up was always a very welcoming household. Friends, family, everyone come together for meals or parties or whatever. And I think that's the same way that I hope my household is in terms of very welcoming and the more the merrier kind of vibe in terms of whether it's my kids' friends, my wife's friends. Everyone come over, have some brisket, some good enchiladas or whatever, and come together over food and tequila or whatever it is.
That's what's up. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great answer. You nailed it.
I'll be very curious to see what everybody's answers are, especially if they, have their own thoughts on what it means to be Hispanic.
I think we'll have a really fun, broad spectrum of answers that'll probably have some commonalities to them, but that's just my guess. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun. I think we got a little bit of history in there, but we also talked a lot about, let the community get to know you and know our future Hispanic bar president and what we're looking to do, not just this month, but, in the months ahead. And I really thank you for your time.
Thank you, Annie. I really appreciate it.
Bienvenidos, a CBA-DBA Limited Series podcast celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, has been brought to you by the Colorado and Denver Bar Associations. On behalf of your host, Annie Martínez, thank you for listening. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy.